Hello and welcome. You're tuned in to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. I've heard you, okay, it's great. Ghosts, you like ghosts. Yeah, sure. Maybe some demonic entities from time to time. And, a good alien abduction story. Who doesn't like one of those? But Dave, we need cryptids. Bring us cryptids. And not the big hairy guy. We're tired of him. We've heard enough big hairy guy stories. Talk to us about creepy lake monsters, Dave. That's what you keep telling me. Well, you already know that I've got fear of everything outdoors. Now you guys want me to be even more fearful of water? Well, fine, I'll do it. Today our guest is with us, Katy Elizabeth. She has been investigating a lake monster right here in the good old US of A. This is, here's the deal, right? I went to Loch Ness. You'd think I've gone all the way out to Scotland, Katy. I've gone to try to put myself in that position to become part of that legend. I cruised Loch Ness in a great little boat all the way from the castle straight across to the gift shop. So I was in it to win it. And I didn't see anything. I wanted to see something, and I was definitely awed by the power and the size of Loch Ness and realized that TV has made it sound like a very small lake and that there's no way anything could live there. This thing is huge, and the possibility that there could be some giant aquatic species living in this deep, dark loch, that's not so far removed. But then I start running the rationale in my head. But could there possibly be real lake monsters here in the United States and in Canada? Is this a possibility? And what drew your attention to this story specifically, to start investing so much of your time and effort into investigating Champ?
Well, I guess I'll start from the very beginning. When I was 7 years old, I'm now 33. I almost said 32. I'm not used to my new age yet because my birthday was April 5th. So,
well, happy birthday. We're sorry we missed it.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It started when I was 7 years old, and I was watching an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. And it was the ones with Robert Stack back in the day with the creepy music at the beginning. And it always freaked me out. Every time I heard that theme song, I always wanted to shut my blinds on my windows. It always creeps me out. And I still do. If I do hear it, like on YouTube, I'll play it and I'm like, oh, it still gets to me. It just still does. But I was sitting there watching Unsolved Mysteries, and it was an episode on Champ, and it was actually showcasing the story of Sandra Mancy, who in 1977 took the famous photo of Champ in Lake Champlain. And I remember sitting there and I yelled to my mom, I'm like, Mom, come here. And she's like, what are you watching? And I'm like, Mom, look, there's a dinosaur in Vermont and New York too, I said to her. And she says, what in the world? Wow, that's interesting. And I'm like, Mom, can we go there? It would be so much fun. Let's go on a trip. And like my mom would take me on joyrides around Rhode Island, is where I'm from. And we never really went very far. She was a CNA. She still is, almost retired. And she was always working all the time. We never really got to take long road trips. So that was exciting for me. I mean, after seeing that photo, it was just total proof to me that there was definitely something in this lake. It didn't look like a doctored photo. And to this day, I know with doing my research and actually have seen, Champ for myself on numerous occasions, as well as gathering video and audio evidence, which I'll get into later, that this photo, in fact, is an authentic photo. So I asked her if we could go. She said, well, how far away is it? And I said, it's about probably 5 hours. And she's like, well, that's kind of far. Because I pulled out the old Rand McNally map that we used to have back in the day. We didn't have GPS. We're spoiled now.
Right now, kids are right now, people are Googling Rand McNally. What the hell is a Rand McNally?
Exactly. Only us like older folks would know right. what that is.
Folks, you're 33. Come on. But you're right. Yeah, that's the old time travel, breaking out the old Rand McNally and finger plotting your way across the map to figure out where you're going. So this story, well, take us back.
Almost like
real quick, Katy, just take us back to this photograph and to this story. Tell us about that original story and when this was originally witnessed and photographed.
Well, Sandra Mancy and her two children and her husband were on vacation on Lake Champlain in 1977. and they stopped in an area up near St. Albans, Vermont, just a picnic or whatever. I think it was around noontime from what she had told me during a telephone call, and I had spoken with her on numerous occasions that they were just, kind of joyriding, and they stopped at a nice grassy spot in a field along the lake. So the kids jumped out of the car, ran down to the shore, and they were playing in the water. And her husband says, "Hey, I'm going to go get the camera. I'll be right back." So she's like, "Okay." So she saw some turbulence in the water, and she thought, well, maybe it's a group of scuba divers. And she's like, wow, maybe it's just a huge school of fish. There's like a lot of large walleye and other very large species of fish in Lake Champlain. So she had thought maybe this is what she was seeing. And when she turned around to look up at the car and then turned back around to look, she saw this back, hump rise to the surface of the water. It was basically the back of the animal, and then the head and the neck came up, a long, long neck, and it turned around and it looked like towards her, and she's like, oh my God, my kids are in the water. But she was in complete awe. She wasn't panicking, but when her husband came down with the camera, he just started freaking out, and he's like, get the kids out of the water, and he's screaming, and this animal was looking back and forth because they're, in my opinion, with the studies that I do, they're very sensitive to hearing. Their hearing is extremely sensitive. So this animal was kind of like, uh-oh, what's going on? And it basically went gently down, submerged, and went under the water, and that was it. And before it submerged, she took the famous photo that's all over the internet. It's actually on display at the Echo Center Aquarium in Burlington, Vermont. They don't have it on display all the time, which I think they should. They do take it out on occasion for people to see, but that's basically the story of what she saw. And then on the ride back home, her kids said, "Mom, what was that?" She's like, "I don't know." And they said, "Well, I got an idea." One of her kids said, "It's a 2,000-pound duck." So it's just a fascinating photo, and the story behind it is extremely fascinating. And unfortunately, Mrs. Manzi passed away a few weeks ago. So she unfortunately had cancer, and it's very sad. But she was up there in age, and I think she lived a very long and happy life, and certainly brought a lot of attention to Champ and Lake Champlain, that's for sure.
All right. Now, can you tell me, being a researcher, I mean, you know that the famous Loch Ness Monster images have all been debunked. There's, they've eventually come out and they said the famous black and white one was, I think they call it the surgeon's photograph, that he admits that he put a little head on a small mechanized submarine and floated it out there. What about this Champ photograph? Has there been any talk outside, of the normal skeptic realm saying it was a fake photograph? Has there ever been anybody that's come forward to really have kind of a substantial look at the fact that this might be a fake photograph as well?
Well, it has been studied by numerous experts. There was at one time Joseph Zarzinski, who did a lot of research here in Lake Champlain in the 70s and 80s. He actually took the photo and sent it to the University of Arizona to be analyzed. And there was no impositions, nothing to show that this photo was faked. Although in the last, I would say, 10 to 12 years, there was a couple gentlemen with the Skeptical Inquiry magazine publication that came up here, and they went out and they actually had, it wasn't even a cardboard cutout. It was just a paper cutout of what the neck kind of looked like. And they took it out there to try to get scale size, and they said the water wasn't deep enough, and the animal was only I would say, from what they said, 12 feet long. So that means it's not a monster, according to them. But there was a little experiment that they had done, and one of the researchers, Ben Radford, he said that he thinks that this is in fact some sort of strange-looking log that just happened to pop up. And he believes that she's a genuine eyewitness to what she saw, but he believes that this was a log, which I beg to differ, because I have seen these animals, and I did see the head and neck on one occasion, and it certainly is Champ. So, I mean, everybody has their own opinion, so that's okay. That's what makes it fun.
All right. Well, that happened. Her sighting was in what year?
1977.
All right. And had there been sightings previous to that of some kind of creature living in that lake?
Absolutely. Sightings go all the way back, as far as we know, to the Abenaki and Iroquois tribes that lived around Lake Champlain. They told stories of a very big serpent or snake in the lake. And actually, what I find really interesting about these stories that go back, at that time when the natives were here, it's interesting because at Lake Okanagan in British Columbia, we have Ogopogo. And Ogopogo stories are so much like Champ. And I've come across a couple of videos that are very similar to the videos that I have of this vertical undulation that this animal gives off, almost like a caterpillar crawling on a table. It's a very strange vertical undulation that I had never seen before. Growing up on the water in Rhode Island, I'm familiar with, boat wakes and dolphins and whales and all kinds of things. And when I saw this specific vertical undulation, I was just like, wow, this is just insane. This isn't anything I've ever seen before. But I find it interesting in two places that are along the same, what they call it, the monster belt, the same latitude, that it's interesting, like, as well as Nessie too. The story between Nessie, Ogopogo, and Champ seem to be very similar. Even the on-land sightings, which I'll get into later, that I find extremely interesting, that most people really don't know about unless they really are into 14 research, cryptozoology, and things like that. But yeah, I just think it's really cool just to look at the Native Americans and all the way in British Columbia that had the same exact stories of this snake in the lake, and the same thing over here on Lake Champlain, which is like thousands of miles away from each other.
Are there native species like snakes, eels, fish, pike, something like that, that would maybe fit some of the visuals that have been seen?
Well, we have lake sturgeon here in the lake that are extremely old, that go back to the dinosaurs. They're contemporaries of the dinosaurs. They grow to about, probably the largest, around 7 feet in length. But the thing is, I believe that maybe some of the sightings, a very small percentage, could be sturgeon. They are really kind of freaky looking. They have this armored plating on their back. But the thing is, when you have the head and neck sighting, and like I have seen, it's like, okay, that's definitely not a sturgeon. And then you have the on land sightings where you have drag marks of a tail, or, webbed feet prints, and all these other factors that come into play. Well, those aren't sturgeon. So,
right.
But I'm sure that there are many sightings that are in fact sturgeon. There's no doubt. The only thing is with the sturgeon theory is that sturgeon in Lake Champlain are endangered, so there's really not that many in Lake Champlain. There's also eels. Eels don't normally get that large in Lake Champlain. I'm sure there's some specimens that get fairly large. I would say probably the most up to 4 feet in length, which doesn't account for 15 to 25 feet long creature that most describe. They have almost the same type of coloring in a way. Champ is usually this blackish brown color. I've heard of a couple pea green variations in color, but I believe that might be due to the fact that there's moss growing on them. It's almost like turtles that are in hibernation for the winter time. When they start coming out, they have a lot of moss that covers their shell. And I think this is the same phenomenon, because I had a friend of mine that had seen, I'll get into that story later, but she had seen a couple of Champ animals, and one of them, she said, it looked all moldy to me. That's all I could think of. And I said, well, that's kind of weird. And I'm thinking, well, maybe it's just individuals that vary in color. And then I'm like, wait a minute. And I started just thinking about growing up on the water. I grew up on the ocean till I was like 7. And then after that, I grew up on a lake. So I'm familiar with snapping turtles and frogs and all that cool stuff. And just seeing the snapping turtles when they would come out of their hibernation state, you would see all of this moss covering their carcass, their shell. So I think that might be the variation in color with the pea green thing. So
right, it could have to do with the water table levels. If there's different algae or moss that's on the top, and at that time of year there's a lower water table, it might be picking that up as it's coming up. So this has been seen going back a long time. Are there, by any chance, with the Native Americans, are there any pictograms, any images that any of them have ever drawn of this creature that we can find historic relevance and reference to as well?
Well, it's really interesting. There was a powder horn from like the 1700s that depicted this dragon-like animal on this powder horn. And that was really interesting. I'm trying to think of pictographs. There actually was a really strange rock down in an area on the Connecticut River, actually, which if you keep going north, you're right in the Champlain region. But what was really interesting about that, this pictograph was really neat because it was on this rock and it looks just like a champ animal. But what's interesting is the neck on it looks like it's snapped or something, which is really interesting because there is a type of marine reptile, which I don't believe this is what champ is. In the past, I had thought this is what this animal might be as a species. But there's something called a Tanystropheus. It's an ancient reptile from the mid-Triassic period. And when they found fossils of the Tanystropheus, their neck was actually snapped. During post-mortem, they would kind of like snap their neck around. It would just snap it. And they would find these fossils like this with their neck snapped. And I mean, it's really interesting to see these like pictograms like on this rock of these animals that are, some of them are really long and serpentine, like almost like when Champ is swimming in full speed mode that I've seen, that, vertical undulation. And then you have this other image of these same kind of serpentine looking things, but then you see like this long neck appendage thing snap down. It's really strange. So I'm not saying that's what it is, but it's a possibility. So, it's not very far from here. This is actually in Bellows Falls, Vermont. So it's probably from here, I would say about two and a half hours from here.
Okay, so you're 7 years old. You talked Mom into going to visit this area. Was she pretty open to it, realizing that her daughter wanted to see a sea monster? Lake monster? Sorry.
My mom is a very open person. She believes in all the weird stuff, the UFOs, especially the paranormal. She's had a lot of paranormal experiences. Yeah, she was interested in it, but she never really pursued it. So I was like depressed. I'm like, oh man, when am I going to ever get there? So what I did was I went to my local library in my elementary school and I said, oh, do you guys have any books on Champ, the Lake Champlain monster, or Nessie of Loch Ness? And she kind of looked at me like I was insane. And I ended up getting a couple of books, actually probably 3 books. And I'm trying to remember what the Nessie books were. It was so long ago, I just, But the Champ book that I got was a book by Joseph Zarzinski, and it was called Champ Beyond the Legend. And I just found it so fascinating, and I was like, wow, this is so cool. I want to go there. And it was weird because I would watch every documentary there was on Nessie. And on Champ, there wasn't a lot. There was a few that I had seen. But Robert Rhines, as far as Loch Ness, he was my Loch Ness idol. And then my Lake Champlain idol was Dennis Hall, who's actually my boyfriend. So that's interesting. He's a lot older than me, but we met years and years later. And it was really weird because when I met him, I was like, wow. I felt like I told him, I'm like, I feel like I'm meeting Michael Jackson. And he thought it was the funniest thing. It's just neat to meet your idol, someone that you looked up to for years. So, and he signed his book for me, Champ Quest, The Ultimate Search. That's his, actually he's got 2 books on Champ. So that was really cool. But I finally got up here in 2012. And it's funny, it's been a wild ride since, and I've just gained so much knowledge and so much material. It's just amazing. It was like, okay, I look back to when I was 7, and I'm like, this had to be my life calling. There's no doubt about it, because who would think their life calling would be a lake monster? You know what I mean? Even though I hate to call them monsters, it's just not really what they are. But
well, talk to me.
And then in 2000.
I was going to say, between
ahead.
the famous photograph and when you got there and started researching, what were some of the other famous sightings that took place?
Let's see. There's just so many. I'm trying to think of the best ones. Well, Dennis Hall, he's got a lot of great videos, tons of videos. And I remember seeing his 1985 video, which was the year I was born. It's like, whoa. I was just a baby. And I remember seeing this video, and it was kind of far away. And back then, camcorders were kind of crappy. They didn't have everything was fuzzy. And then plus you get on a VHS tape, which makes it even fuzzier because it's an old piece of footage. But I found the clip very interesting because when you do enlarge it, you can actually see something about, it looks like a very broad body, the shape of like a Volkswagen's body. And then you can see this like long appendage come up and thrash in the water. And he took that, like I said, in 1985, and him and his daughter were in a canoe. So they were coming back from just like kind of joyriding on the lake, and his daughter says, "Hey, Dad, there's something out there." And he looks, and he's like, "Oh, God." So he took out the camcorder, and he has 1 foot in the canoe, one on the dock. So he's trying to balance the camera. And the funny thing is about Champ, they always, and even Bigfoot and all that stuff, I'm sure, I've never seen Bigfoot, but it's one of those things where you almost feel like you're never prepared. And they like get you at the darnest moments. Like you're like, I've got my tripod set up, I got this set up, and then you don't see them, and then you're just standing there again, you're talking with somebody, you're like, oh, hang on, give me a couple minutes, I gotta set up my tripod, and then all of a sudden they pop up, and you're like, ah! It's just, they catch you off guard, they really do.
Cryptids are such
that
dicks.
Piece of video was cool. They are.
That's never.
How
about our needs, huh? How about that, Champ? How about that, Sasquatch? How about our needs? Just stand still and pose, wave, do something.
I think they like me though, because like I said, I've been very lucky, and there have been times where we Dennis and I would joke around and we'd leave the lake when we didn't see anything, and we'd flip the bird out the window at the lake,
Right.
Like, thanks a lot, Champ. But can't be too mean to Champ, because like I said, we're lucky with what we've gotten so far. So I try to be respectable and blow him kisses and stuff like that.
How big is Lake Champlain, and how deep does it go?
Well, Lake Champlain is around 125 miles long, and it is actually 400 feet deep at its deepest point, which I don't believe that is the deepest point. There are many caves that have not really been explored. Dennis actually is a scuba diver, and he went down in a couple of caves, and he said he couldn't believe how far they just kept going. And then, of course, with that, you get the bends, you can't go down at a certain point. So he had to stop. But he said, it was just amazing, like cavern on top of cavern. And when you look at the bathymetric map of Lake Champlain, which is basically a side scan sonar image imprint of the lake, and it will show all these there's a deep channel here, but they never show the caves because the side scan sonar is unable to penetrate these little caverns that just open right up into something else. So there's a lot of things down there, excuse me, besides Champ that we don't know about geologically as well. And then, it's so massive that we actually have 70 plus islands on Lake Champlain, which is insane. Just the area where I research, I just think of that and I'm like, 70 islands. Where in the world are these 70 islands? But there, in fact, it says 70 islands on Lake Champlain. And there's also, let's see, trying to remember. Oh, yeah, 300,000.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, is the water clear? Is it murky? Loch Ness is just a muddied mess. You can't see anything. What is Lake Champlain like?
Well, Loch Ness is extremely murky because of the concentration of peat on the bottom of Loch Ness that just keeps stirring up. And Lake Champlain is not that murky, but it's getting there because of the pollution that's getting in the lake. Unfortunately, we have a lot of sewage runoff. We got a lot of problems with pollution, people throwing garbage around the lake, and I'm one of the people who go out and I have cleanup events and things like that to try to clean up the lake, not only just for Champ, but just for future generations to enjoy the lake. It's just a beautiful place, and it's a shame that it's getting to this point where I don't want it to get to the point where it's irreversible,
Right.
And so the visibility, it depends on the location and it depends on the time of year. So when you usually get around July, August, September, it's very murky in a lot of places because there's something called blue-green algae that grows in the lake. Blue-green algae is very poisonous algae, and what's happening is the sewage and also fertilizers that either farmers are using, but just people in general, and the stuff is like when it rains, it's running down the streets, running into the lake. That phosphorus is feeding these blue-green, this blue-green algae, and it's like blooming. And it's poisonous to dogs. It's just detrimental. It's terrible. And the clarity of the lake can be really crappy. And the hotter it is, the worse it is. So if we have a really hot summer, and this does happen, with the blue-green algae, it can be quite a mess. And, so usually visibility for a scuba diver, normally I would say around 4 feet, 5 feet.
Oh, good God.
But it just depends. It just depends on...
Katie, that's just too damn close. If I go down there swimming, by the time it's 4 feet away from me, I'm evacuating my bowels and I'm done. That's it. End of game. I'd like to know, too, then.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it just depends on the location, though, so don't get me wrong.
Right.
I mean, there are some spots that are actually pretty clear. I went swimming with my friend once. I've been once in the lake swimming, and it's not just because of Champ. It's because of the lampreys and all these other heebie-jeebie things that I don't really want around my legs. Well, I love Champ, but I don't know if I really want Champ underneath my feet.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
It's a phobia. It's a phobia thing with me. If I can't see the bottom, I don't want to be in it.
No.
That's just me.
No, that's a good phobia to have. Talk to me. What is indigenous to that lake that would be a food source? Do you believe that this is an herbivore and an omnivore? What do you think it's living off of?
Well, that's a really good question because I have thought about it. One of my friends, his name's Charlie Auer. He's in his 90s. He thinks that Champ is an herbivore, that he eats just plants. And I believe that they probably are opportunistic feeders. They probably do eat plants. Who knows what they eat? And I'll talk about another story that has to do with feeding. But I believe that they eat fish because there's just so many times where I've taken video and you'll see fish jumping and all this like commotion going on with fish, and then all of a sudden here comes Champ, and you're like, whoa, he's going after a school of fish, and it's just amazing. And there's like so many times that fishermen have been out there and they're casting out a line trying to catch perch or whatever. Especially they love perch and they love smelt. And what I do when I go out in my research boat and I go to different sighting locations, I use my underwater camera to see what type of fish are mostly in these areas, because that kind of gives us an idea of their main staple of what they're eating. It's not just, I've heard people say, oh, they eat sturgeon. I'm like, are you kidding me? Their head's not that big. I mean, sturgeon can be massively huge, like 7 feet long. And it's just silly to think of that. Not just that, they're armor plated. They're not like a soft, fleshy type of fish. But, you have smelt in the lake. You have perch. Those seem to be their favorite.
But is there enough to sustain a creature or possibly multiple creatures of this size?
That's another good question, but I think I might have figured that one out. Anyway, now I believe that Champ could possibly be either or a reptile or an amphibian, or both. There could possibly be a hybrid connection here somehow. When we originally started in history with the amphibians, then the amphibians started, turning into reptiles. That might be a possibility. I'm confused to the fact where there's so many reptilian traits with Champ and there's so many amphibious traits with Champ. I'm leaning a little bit more towards amphibian now. Before I was a little bit more towards the reptile aspect. So I'm not sure, but they seem to possess both traits. But both of, amphibians and reptiles have a lot of the same similar traits, including eye shine. Eye shine, nocturnal eye shine, which is called tapetum lucidum. And in Latin, that means bright carpet. And basically, animals that are nocturnal give off this glowing eye shine when a light is shown upon them. And there's many stories of these animals in the marshlands, on land, and people have seen this eye shine. And including myself, I had an experience with the eye shine at one time on the lake. And my friend was with me, and she had heard stories of Champ growing up here, and she was like, I gotta use a good word, piddling her pants. Like, she was so scared. And I'll have to tell you that story. I just have so many amazing, it's like I could write a huge movie. If they made a movie about my Champ life, it would probably like do really well. Take out the popcorn, you know.
Just for myself and the other listeners, how high or drunk were you to go out on a lake at night looking for some giant creature that may capsize and eat you and your friend?
Well, the thing is, it's really scary, especially at night.
Yeah.
Because you just don't know what the heck is out there.
Right.
And the thing is with me, like, there's times, like, I've gone to restaurants on the lake because there's a really nice marina across the lake, and I've had, like, a couple of cocktails, and you know what? I haven't seen a darn thing. There's no way that anybody could be high or drunk enough, unless they're on hallucinogenics, maybe, which I've never done drugs, so that doesn't count.
Wait a minute. You're saying there's no way to get high or drunk enough to see them? I'll take that challenge.
But I mean, I've heard so many people laugh about Champ or Nessie or Bigfoot, and they're like, "Oh well, were you drunk?" And I'm like, back in the day, like, yeah, I would party or whatever, but like I never saw Bigfoot or like Nessie or Champ running across, you know, the road or anything. It doesn't make any sense to me, you know. And when I do my research, like I had one of my friends one time that wanted to do research with me, and he would drink so badly. Like, you know what? I don't want you on my boat, and I don't want nothing to do with you. Why? Because I'm like, that takes away the validity. That takes away the validity. Sure. You know, someone says, "Oh, you were drunk. You had a beat." You know what I mean? It's just like I'm very professional about what I do, and I don't put up with that mess. I'm like, nope, head for home.
Yeah. Well, you could have just Dextered his ass and tipped the boat, dropped him, and said, "Champ got him."
I could have used him for a Champ bait project.
That's right. Start trolling with him.
Exactly.
Well, but going out at night, is that not, I mean, listen, you don't like to go in the water when you can't see the bottom. You're out on a little boat against something much larger and force, you know, in its natural element. That doesn't unnerve you?
It does, but I just figure, I'm like, well, according to, so many of the eyewitness reports of these animals at night, that indicates to me that they're mostly nocturnal. So I'm like, well, you know, I have to, you know, explore every avenue, and I have to be brave. You just have to be brave if you really love what you do and you want to find an answer. And mostly I do this to protect these animals. I do it because I know that one day, if it's not me, which I hope it is, it would be really, I would probably cry my face off if it did happen, if I did discover what they were. The most important thing, like I said, is one day someone's going to find something, and then the scientists take over, and then there'll still be work to be done, though. That's the important thing, because, you know, we want to find out what their habits are, where they go, where they, you know, in the wintertime, if they hibernate, which I believe that they go into like basically a torpid mode, like turtles do, like bury themselves halfway in the mud, and aquatic frogs also have this ability, they actually have this ability to produce their own antifreeze with their blood glucose, which is really cool. That's why they don't freeze totally solid. So that's their amphibious strange trait that they have, so they don't freeze. So yeah, the most important thing to me is protection, and to find out, you know, what their habits are. And gosh, it's like I did a shark tagging expedition in the Atlantic one time, and it was so much fun because we tagged a mako shark. And for like a year, I got to watch this shark go to North Carolina online. You could see like the trail where that would be amazing to tag them to see what their habits are, you know, their migrational habits in the lake, right, and wherever they go.
Is there a specific time of year?
Be amazing.
Is there a specific time of year that it seems easier to sight Champ?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually around springtime. Actually, it's getting there. I would say in the next couple of weeks is the time that they're going to start coming out, because the water right now is probably around 37, 38 degrees, so it's still quite cold. And with these animals, I believe that they are ectotherms. And an ectotherm is unlike an endotherm, which is a warm-blooded animal, much like mammals or even people. We actually have our own internal body heat. But an ectotherm depends on the outside temperature to sustain their inner core temperature. And with that being said, I believe when the turtles start coming out, that's when Champ starts coming out, because that's when we start getting sighting reports and things like that. But usually around May. It depends on the water temperature. Right now, like I said, it's quite cold. It usually when it reaches around 50 degrees Fahrenheit is when we start getting sighting reports.
Is there, too, when you're talking about this, has there been long periods of time where Champ just isn't seen anymore, like a year or two?
Usually every year there's some type of report, which is interesting to me. That means that there is a decent population of these animals in the lake. Going back to the food thing, I don't think I got into why I believe that, they could sustain on, say, a certain amount of fish. I forgot to tell you about that part.
Well, go ahead and then we'll take a break.
If they're a reptile or an amphibian, there are cases of crocodiles, alligators, also different types of amphibians as well that can go about a year and a half without food. So they really don't need a lot of food to sustain. And to also say that they could be opportunistic feeders, and I'll tell you the story later about that, why I believe that might be the case, as well as the fish staple that they have in their diet. They're not a mammal. A mammal would eat this lake out of house and home. They would be constantly eating. You'd see them all the time coming up for air. So that's just my idea.
We are a hungry species, aren't we?
Yes.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back. We've got more Katy Elizabeth, our guest, as we continue our search for Champ right here on the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.
Beyond the Darkness.
We're back. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. Beyond the Darkness is on the air, and never one to fail my guest. I had to set her off on an unease moment as we began this next segment with the theme that freaked her out so much from Unsolved Mysteries. How do you not like that theme? It's got the perfect match of creepiness and kind of 80s synth rock. Katy Elizabeth, our guest today, as we are in search for Champ, the lake beast of Lake Champlain. It's pretty cool hearing these stories and kind of the history of what's going on. We've attacked some of the hows and possibilities. Let's now get into some of the sightings and the actual encounters you've had. Now, at what age were you when you had your first full-on, what you would consider, sighting of this creature?
Let's see, it was, you actually caught me off guard there with the Unsolved Mysteries theme. I was like, I was ready to shut my blinds, but I have no blinds up here in my office. I'm like, no, it was awesome. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. It brought back that memory vividly. But yeah, basically it was 2012. So let's see, I'm not good with math. I'm 33 now.
That'd be 6 years ago. So you were about 18 and a half.
27. No, it was 27.
I know, I was kidding. Just not good at math myself.
Good job.
All right. So you were about 27. Flattering. You were about 27 years old. And walk me through this. Were you living in the area? Were you just there for a visit? What was the weather like? What was your day like? And then let's get into this.
Well, excuse me, I was living in Rhode Island where I grew up. I actually just recently moved here to Lake Champlain, finally, after all these years of driving up every 2 weeks to do research, which got really tiring. I came up for a trip, and I remember I was watching TV, and I think it was Monsters of the Deep on National Geographic or something like that. I happened to see just, the episode there where it wasn't necessarily Champ, it was Ogopogo and a few other lake monsters, and I was like, oh, wow, and just that whole thing with Champ came back. Because at the time I was doing a lot of paranormal work, and I had been doing that for years. And I had been studying Champ and other lake monsters throughout all of this, but like I said, I never got a chance to really come up to Lake Champlain. So when I saw that other, episode on TV, I was like, oh gosh, it kind of lit up this bulb in my head. I'm like, I really need to go up there. It's been long enough. It's been a dream of mine to go up there, and let's just do it. Let's just get up there and see if we have an experience. And I never really thought that I would have an experience, especially my first time up here. It was insane. And it was the second day into camping on Button Bay on Lake Champlain, where I had heard there were a lot of different sightings. Like Dennis had gotten tons of videos at Button Bay. So I said, well, let's camp at Button Bay. I had a couple of my friends that did Bigfoot, research. And they're like, oh yeah, let's go up there. So came up, spent the first day, didn't really see anything. And then the second day we were sitting and eating breakfast. It was a late breakfast because we were like up all night. Usually what happens when you're camping and you're sitting around the fire and talking and having fun. And it was like 11:30 in the morning, and I'm like, well, what is that? And I'm looking at it in the middle of the bay. I could see just like Sandra Mancy described, it was funny, like this turbulence in the water. I'm like, well, that's kind of strange. So I just thought it was school fish or something. And in the background, there was a couple of boats moored in the bay. So it was interesting because I used them for scale size to when I did see this animal pop up. And I saw this dark colored hump rise to the surface of the water. And I'm trying to think of this logically and say, okay, it looks to be like around 15 feet in length. It was almost as big as the sailboat that were sitting out there. And it just basically moved casually along. And I didn't have my camera on me at hand, which really sucked because I just didn't expect to see anything, especially the first time up. I was like, oh, well, I'll have my camera with me next time after this happened. It was just, ever since then, I've, always had the camera embedded in my hand, and now it's embedded on a tripod in my hand. The tripod is the most important piece to me, one of the most important pieces of equipment to have to film Champ, because you have to have a stable video. So it moved casually along, and then it started picking up speed, and it started doing this caterpillar-like crawl. And it was the strangest looking thing. I'm like, hey, do you see that? My friend's like, wow, that's really weird. What is that? I'm like, that's going to be Champ, because I've never seen anything like it before. I didn't see a head and neck come up at the time, nothing like that, but just this vertical undulation that was it looked like he was having like muscle spasm. It was the strangest looking thing. And so I yelled off to my other friend, like, hey guys, do you see that? And they didn't even care. They're like, oh, we want to see Bigfoot. That's kind of cool, because they didn't see, the head and neck come up, or, having a trained eye on the water, growing up on the water, I have a trained eye for that stuff. And I just knew that this thing was definitely not an otter. It wasn't anything that I've ever seen before. So that was my first Champ experience. And it was interesting because I was just so excited. And that night, I told my friends, I'm like, let's go out on the trail and see if we can have an experience. And they're like, on the trail? I'm like, well, there's been on-land sightings. And one of the sightings that I had seen on TV was this woman named Christine Hebert, and I'm really good friends with her now, which is really cool. She's like a grandmother to me, but she's in her 90s, and she was looking out the window at her family boathouse. They have a boathouse up in Burlington, Vermont, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning. Her dogs were barking, and she figured that maybe someone was trying to take off with a rowboat, because I guess they had some trouble before with people stealing things, and she just didn't know what was going on. So she ran to the window and looked out, and they had just installed this light pole. It's like a street light, but it's right over this boat ramp in the boatyard. And the water at the time was right up to the light, so it was, it was quite high. Now it's out quite a ways. The water table was very high at this time. It was in the spring. So she looks out underneath the light pole. She could see something. She's like, what in the world is that? She goes, I swear to God, she looked just like a dinosaur with a very long neck, looking right up into that light pole, walked right up to it. She goes, it came out of the woods. And I'm thinking, well, what the heck was it doing in the woods? But what I found interesting was going there to this location and then actually looking on Google Maps. I found out that there's an extensive marsh system surrounding this area. So these animals crossing, through the woods were coming from this extensive marsh system, which is a great feeding area for them. Many reports at night in the marsh of the glowing eyes. I think it's a very interesting fact that it's a very shallow area. You've got a lot of frogs and turtles and fish, and, it's a very easy feed for them as well as a good place to hide. And so she saw this and she's like, oh my God, I'm not going to tell anybody because they're going to think I'm insane. And the nocturnal theory that I talked about correlates with this because, this is like 3:30 in the morning. So she told her brother, she told her mother about it, and then the next time she had another sighting, it was 2 weeks later, around the same time, looking out that same window in the same spot, she saw two of them come out. And she said one was bigger and one was smaller, and the smaller one was brown. She said the bigger one was pea green, and she goes, it looked all moldy. That's all I could think of, and that's what I was telling you earlier about the moss idea that I have. So that was like really interesting, and I've investigated that area, and I found some really interesting prints of like a webbed foot. It looks like an alligator foot. It's the strangest thing, and I know that there are very large snapping turtles in Lake Champlain. Then you have pretty large beavers, and they have a webbed foot. But this is a four-toed print that I had gotten, and these drag-type marks. So I'm not saying, definitively it's champ, but it's very interesting, and there are some really interesting cutouts through the marsh that need, I'm going to start putting out some plot cameras and game cameras out in these locations. They're very hard to get to. That's the problem. You have to take a kayak out, and then once you get out there and you try to step on the ground, you kind of sink in a little bit of mud. So they're very smart. They know where they are protected, where no one's going to come around. So, but it's definitely why I do a lot of nighttime research and research in the marshlands, because there's 300,000 acres of marshland around Lake Champlain. That's massive, yeah. And when you look at the Google Earth map and you look closely at these marshlands, it looks just like Louisiana. It's just amazing. It's so primordial, and it looks like when you watch Swamp People and they're out there catching those gators. It's the same. It just looks the same. It's just unbelievable. And it's like, who would think that this type of swamp would be in Vermont? It's really, really cool. So I think there's a lot to the marshlands here, and there's certainly enough room for them to hide when they want to, and certainly enough places for them to do their nocturnal type of hunting as well, besides in the lake itself.
That's remarkable, and certainly that does give an ecosystem that seems to be conducive if there is something like this. But you think that there's actually a family unit that lives out there. This isn't just a solo creature.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've had times where I've taken video, and there's some videos that I've never put online. I mean, not like head and neck videos or anything good like that. I hope one day I will get a head and neck video, because I had an experience. It was like on the New York side of the lake, and Dennis and I were sitting at Button Bay, and he says, "Oh, I'm looking into the binoculars and I see two champs over there." I said, "You're insane. It's probably two boats." I was like, I'm picking on him, And he says, "Well, look for yourself." I said, "Okay." So I looked through the binoculars, and I'm like, well, they kind of look like boats, but I'm not. It was just like the upturned boat description of Nessie that you hear about over at Loch Ness. So I see these two upturned boat-looking objects, and I said, "Oh, I don't know about that." And I nudged him. I said, "You're crazy." And I just started laughing. Because, I had seen Champ before, but I just couldn't really tell. It was quite a ways away. And when I said to him, "You're crazy," the one in the front, the head and neck came up, and I was just like, oh my God. And I grabbed my camera, and I don't like to tell this story a lot, but this is what really happened. And I grabbed my camera, it didn't focus. I should have just taped it anyway, but I was just in this total freaking shock what I was seeing. This long neck, and I couldn't believe how long it was. I said to myself, how in the world is this animal picking up a neck that long? Because, I mean, it's hard to tell from that distance, but it had to be at least 8 feet long. And it could have been even maybe 9 feet long. I don't know. But the reason why I know it was very long is because when the animal picked up its chin, I know it was feeding because you could see like turbulence around them, like schools of fish or whatever. And it was strange because when it picked up its head, it kind of did this thing where its chin was up and it looked like it had something in its mouth. I think it was a fish in its mouth. And it almost like when you see like a blue heron eating, they'll take a fish and then they'll put their chin up and they gulp it down. You can see their gullet and their throat kind of go like that. And that's what this looked like. And what was crazy was the length of the neck, like I said, had to be extremely long because it curled its neck around in a coil at the very top, near the top of the head, and it looked just like a snake would coil in a loop. So, and after it coiled in that loop, I was like, what the heck? Because there was so much more neck left. I'm like, this is insane. No one's ever going to believe what the heck I'm seeing. Like, there's no way in hell. No one's going to believe me. And then it was so strange because it was such a controlled motion. It was like watching one of those slow motion videos of like a cobra coming up, just slow motion. And then it slowly went down, and then it just submerged in the front, and then its back went down. And the one in the back, I never saw that one's head or neck, but that one submerged right behind it. And I burst out I just bawled my eyes out. And he's like, ha ha ha, I said, what are you laughing at? He's like, I told you I saw the head and neck before, and you didn't believe me. And that confirmed to me everything that I had been seeing wasn't just a giant eel or a wake or a log, like the Nancy photo explanation by the skeptics. And that was an amazing moment for me to confirm that everything that I was doing was true. And I don't blame if nobody believes me because that's okay. I wouldn't believe it either.
Right. But you encourage them to come out and see it for themselves, right? This is something that
absolutely
it's seen on a pretty regular basis. How many times since you've begun investigating have you actually seen this creature or creatures?
I would say, I have. It's funny because it's funny because you'll see like something really quick come up and then it's gone. So it's like, okay, you try to be logical and say, well, maybe it was something else. But anytime I've ever seen that type of phenomenon where I really think it was Champ, it's in these same locations. Like they're very predictable and they go in the same locations. But I would say probably I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 videos and a few I haven't posted yet because there's like times where I have it set up on the tripod and then nothing happens for hours. So I got to like go through all that and mark down the time, cut the video. Because I always tell people, it's like watching paint dry looking for Champ.
Right. Have you had actual zoologists review the photographs of like the footprints or the video evidence that you've collected to see if they can give you any insight onto what this creature could be, either to debunk or to substantiate what you're actually witnessing?
Yeah, I mean, I've had friends. One of my friends who I became friends with because of analyzing my videos, his name was Dr. Edward Bousfield, and he was from Ottawa, Canada. He did a lot of research on Cadborosaurus and also Ogopogo over in the British Columbia area. And he saw my videos, and he just found them extremely interesting. And he was a biologist, and he was like, wow, that's definitely different. Without seeing a head or neck, he's like, I can't really tell you what it is. And it's the same with me. I do a lot of biological research. I'm actually planning on getting a degree in marine biology as well as marine bioacoustics, which is studying marine animal sounds, which is what I've been doing in Lake Champlain, basically since 2014. I've been doing hydrophone recordings in the lake, and I've gotten quite a few very interesting recordings. One recording in particular is indicative echolocation, also called biosonar.
Now, are these videos and audio on your website so people can follow the link we're going to post today on the show?
Yeah.
Can they go there and hear that for themselves?
Absolutely. Yep. Right on the front page, there's a video that I actually shot in 2014. It was a while back, but it actually shows a few of my videos. One in particular is, excuse me, probably my best video of Champ, and also the recordings as well. I think I did another video, which is a comparison of biological sounds in Lake Champlain compared to the sounds that I believe are Champ. And it's interesting because I've recorded sturgeons, I've recorded many fish species in the lake, as well as boat motors, man-made sounds, and nothing compares. And it's amazing because I've had these clips on, various TV programs, and, I don't think that they would be, putting them on TV and saying that they're Champ. And I know that TV can be, dramatized. That is true, but they've had people analyzing these recordings and are just like, okay, we don't know what that is, which, they're not going to know what they are because it's an animal that's unknown. So that's a good thing. It's not like, oh, well, you have a recording of a whale. Well, we don't have whales in Lake Champlain, obviously, but it's definitely interesting. And like I said, I basically do a lot of biological work, and I study so much that to me, with my studies and how much I've done biology and bioacoustics, it's like everything I've said is what they say as well, but then you'll get some people that have their butt stuck in the mud because they don't want to tarnish their reputation. We have a fisheries biologist lady here. She actually, I never met her. God bless her. I never met her, but she looks just like the secretary on Beverly Hillbillies, like identical. She's like a dead ringer for her. And every time my friend that has seen Champ, every time he sees it, he's like, oh, her again? I'm like, be nice, Mike, be nice.
Miss Hathaway?
Yeah, Miss Hathaway. A dead ringer. It's hilarious. She looks just like her. Seeing that your mom was so supportive of this and had such an interest, did you ever bring her to Lake Champlain to try to see this for herself as well? I have. She actually came up for the first time this past summer in August, and it was really funny because we were sitting on Button Bay. I said, okay, Mom, pull up a chair. She said, okay. And I actually got a very quick clip of two humps coming up, and it was way across the same spot where I saw the head and neck sight. I had the head and neck sighting. And it was hilarious because I said, Mom, it's 8 o'clock. And she goes, what's that mean? I'm like, it's Champ time. She goes, are you serious? Because they're so predictable. There's certain times that I've seen them in the same areas. And when I see them, I mark down the time. And seriously, 9 times out of 10, if you sit and you watch in that same spot every day, say if you did like a month expedition, but you got to spend a lot of time on this lake to see something. That's the thing. It's not like you're going to be out there. I was very fortunate my first time. I don't know how the heck it happened, but it did. But if you mark down your times and the locations, if you sit there long enough, and maybe a while, it might be 2 weeks, it might be 6 months, maybe not that long, but a few months or even a month. It just depends. You will see something there again because they're very. They have like an internal clock. It's almost like deer, when you see deer in a field. If you mark down the time you see those deer, you're going to see them there again at some point because they have that just instinct. Okay, it's this time. They have that internal clock, and they're the same way. It's kind of cool. And you're not going to see this long net come up every time, and you're not going to see this 100-foot long sea monster or lake monster. It's so much smaller, and when you see them come up and you don't see the neck, it's not that impressive, really, because I always thought it would be this like whale thing, this size of a giant whale. And I remember I went out on an expedition for bioacoustics of doing my own private study to help with, my biology work. and that involves Champ and stuff. And I got out on the boat and we saw a huge finback whale. And I was like, what the, wow. I just couldn't believe how big this whale was. I'm like, boy, Champ is small. I was just in total awe on how big this finback whale was. So, but that's always what I expected to see if I did see it.
Has your mom seen your evidence, and what does she think of it?
Oh, she thinks it's amazing, and she knows me enough to like say hello. Like, she's not gonna move up to Lake. I moved up here because I know that there's something here. I've seen it on numerous occasions. I have so much evidence of like. I mean, I think some people, there was no evidence because we don't really know, which is true. But there's just so much that I've gathered only since 2012.
Sure.
And I have more videos and audio evidence than, Loch Ness. Anybody who's got anything at Loch Ness or Lake Okanagan.
Pretty impressive. Yep.
Or anything. And it's just like, I'm just excited about it because it's like, wow, what's next? I'm just hoping for that holy grail of a photo or a video or hopefully a biological specimen would be great because that would totally.
Right.
But the thing is,
not that I'm trying to pressure you, Katy. I'm just saying this woman gave birth to you. She is supporting your crazy antics, chasing a monster.
I will definitely order my mom flowers from there. That would be great.
Perfect.
And I sure hope Champ heard that commercial because I am the Champ mom.
Oh.
And I actually just wrote a new law protecting Champ, and it got passed. So I'm very excited
that's very
about
cool.
that.
You've got to feel pretty good about that. You got a law on the books. Not many people can do that. I mean, real laws are hard to get passed. You got a law protecting something that exists, but the rest of the world still rolls their eyes at. But that's got to say something that they were willing to pass that law to protect something because there must be enough information for them to feel like it's worthy to protect.
It was interesting because I went over to, it was actually on the New York side where, I got this law passed. I went over to Port Henry, New York, which is the home of Champ. And there's more Champ believers than non-believers over there, which is always in my favor. And I actually spoke with the town supervisor, and he has had relatives that have seen Champ. He had thought he had seen something when he was around like 14 or 15, and he saw my videos and my echolocation recordings. And he was just like really impressed, and he's like, all right, well, I'll put it through. And there was a law that was written in 1981, but what had happened was actually Joseph Zarzinski, a researcher back in the 70s and 80s, he requested it. But what was funny about it was all these years, 1981, that's a long time ago, was before I was even born. And what had happened was Port Henry and the town of Mariah, they're right next to each other, and the town of Port Henry, the village, basically dissolved a few years ago. So pretty much now it's kind of, they call it like a hamlet of Mariah. So in other words, any law that was created for Port Henry was dissolved. It was done. And I was just like, well, I think it's time for me to go over there and see if I can get this new law passed. And I wanted to make a new law because the old law at the time, which didn't last that long, said, the Lake Champlain sea serpent, referring to one animal, not many animals. And I basically rewrote the whole law, and I spoke to the town supervisor, and he said, okay. He said, well, we'll put it through and see what happens, show the council everything and see if they'll pass it. So what was really funny was they had an incident in town where they had a really bad fire, and the town supervisor was away in Florida, so poor guy had to come home because of this big fire. And I actually called him and I said, okay, I said, is the board meeting still taking place? Like, are we, is the Champ, law going to be presented at the board meeting? And he said, well, I don't think it's going to be this month. It'll probably be in May. I said, okay, I understand because he has a big responsibility being the head of everything. Everybody's calling him every 5 minutes, poor guy. So I was like, oh, darn. Well, I'm like, patience is a virtue, so just be patient. Good things come to those who wait. My mother always said that. So finally, a friend of mine, it was like midnight, and it was like a couple weeks ago, she says, "Hey, guess what?" And I said, "What?" She says, "Your champ law went through." And I was like, "No, they didn't even tell me. I didn't even know." Like, I guess he probably felt bad that he wasn't going to present it to the board at the time. So I was super excited, and I'm like dancing at midnight. I was so happy, and so now I have to go to a board meeting in May, and it's going to be great. I'm actually going to present them with a cake with champ on it to thank them for passing the new champ law. So it's going to be a good time.
That is really cool, and what an accomplishment for you. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really happy and really surprised that I'm like, wow. I really can do a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I know we've only got a few minutes left here together. Talk to me about a little bit more of the sightings, the encounters. Has there ever been any animals that they believe have been hurt, dogs, things vanishing in the area? Or does this seem to be just pretty strictly aquatic and feeding off of the natural creatures that it's finding there?
Well, as far as being harmful, there really isn't any indication that these animals have done anybody harm. There's been a few close encounters with swimmers. Right down the street from where I live is Kingsland Bay on Lake Champlain. And there was a guy who was jumping off a dock. And the poor guy, this was, I believe it was 1992, he jumped in the water, got out, went to jump in again, and when he did, he saw this ugly head looking at him. And he was like, "Oh, I guess I'm not jumping in the water now." And that freaked him out. It would have freaked me out for sure. But didn't bother him at all. He was just very curious. He was probably just kind of hunkering down at the bottom and saw these bubbles and was like, "What's that?" And then there's been stories from the 1700s that said, and they always elaborated back then, that they had cattle disappearing in the farms around Lake Champlain, that they were dragged down to the water. And you have some stories of Nessie like that. There's kind of really neat painting. I can't remember who it's by, but it's a picture of Nessie on land with a sheep in its mouth. So there's always those like crazy stories of them going after livestock. But whether or not they're true, I really don't know. I don't believe that they are. But one story I wanted to mention, which I didn't mention earlier, we're talking about the feeding habits and possibly besides fish being their main staple, if they are mostly, eating the fish or they're an, how do I put it? Opportunistic feeder. There was a dump that was open back in, I think it was the 50s and before that, and they closed it, I think, I would say probably like 15 or 20 years ago. It was the town of Panton, Vermont. It was their own town dump. And it's probably 10 minutes from my house. It's I'm in Champ country for sure. A lot of sightings around here. So this gentleman was driving up to, this dump, and he actually ran the town dump, and he had opened the gates early in the morning so people could go in and dump their garbage. So he opened up the gate, drove in, and when he drove in, he swears he saw a champ eating out of the dump. Like it was eating garbage or whatever it was, whether it was rotting meat or whatever, it was eating out of that dump. And then when he drove in, it obviously scared it, and it scurried off and ran off into a place called Otter Creek, which these marsh systems are all around Otter Creek. There's tons of marsh right near that dump too. It was just like amazing to see a champ eating out of the dump. It's like seeing a bear. It would be a lot cooler seeing champ than a bear, but it's amazing. So they could be opportunistic. And a friend of mine and I went to where the old dump used to be, and I might put some cameras down there. I'm going to have to hide them because it's a walking trail now, so I might have to hide those. But I was looking at the area, and there's like the creeks right there. It's very creepy. It's very primordial and strange. And the marshland around here really is primordial, and it just reminds you of Louisiana and the Everglades. It's weird. So that was an interesting sighting as well.
We appreciate you joining us to share in your experiences and the history of this story. And we'll put up a link again to Katy's website and to Champ Search, the Facebook page. You can follow their research and evidence and information that she's posted there as well. Katy, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond the Darkness.
It was a pleasure, and I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you, and we'll be back on Friday, Defense Against the Supernatural. We'll talk about what happens when you're attacked by the paranormal with our guest, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, plus a frightening brand new edition of Theater of the Mind. That's this Friday here on the best in Paranormal Talk Radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.